Creativity is being disrupted. With new opportunities emerging every day, composers and musicians of all stripes are getting more options than ever before. If you're a musician with an idea...
I've an idea.
Ah, what's your name, young man?
Hello, I'm Eric. I'm a second-year composer studying at the Royal Academy.
Well then, take my hand, Eric. Let's go! Prepare yourself for a new domain of creativity.
Wow!
Now, tell me about this idea of yours.
Well, it's a series of short pieces for wind octet. The idea is that I'm taking the late Renaissance style of Palestrina, setting it to the liturgical text Magnificat, but for a modern twist, I'm relying solely on exploration of multiphonics to achieve...
That's really interesting. With idea.ai, you can generate an idea at the touch of a button. Then use split transform to extend it, and now you have your verse, bridge, and chorus.
Okay, I'll be interested in...
You gotta have lyrics, right? You said something about a mass. Masses have lyrics, I think. Step forward, Gen Specker module. Just enter our keywords, happy chilled vibe, and tick the Gen Alpha box for max engagement. And just like that, we got our track.
Feed the fire that will keep us strong. Got that feeling going all night long.
That's really nice. It's just that...
Now let's find your audience by hosting on Web2 Rep. And hey, check it out. You got 10,000 followers.
Hold on, really?
Yeah, look at the comments. Fire. Lit. This lit my fire. It's all over TikTok, Eric. 5 million views.
Wow.
It's blowing up. Okay, we gotta write this. We need video. Just one click away with Pixel Christ.
Feel the music glowing deep inside. It's the music makes us feel alright.
Check it out, Eric. Socials are going crazy.
Wow. I don't want to completely do away with it.
Hey. It's just been remixed by a top Zumba influencer. Check it out. They're all stepping to your jam.
I know. Listen, I really...
Will you shut up? Will you shut the fuck up, you stupid fucking pinhead loser? No one gives a fuck about Palestinia. Stupid fucking music no one listens to. No one cares about multiphonics. Squeaky fucking nonsense. Look what I'm doing. Look what I'm doing for you, you fucking moron.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be ungrateful. I just wanted to, point out that,
Hey, the money's rolling in. You got $67,000 this month alone.
Really?
Yeah, and you're projected to double that next month. It's all coming in. Ad rev, sponsorships, royalties, it's all happening. You've done it, Eric. You expanded your inner creative, and now... Just some deductions. This sample is the property of Universal. This one's Sony, so you gotta pay royalties there. These chord progressions are owned by Unison. Those lyrics are the intellectual property of Gen Specker module. That leaves you with $500.
Oh...
All we gotta do now is deduct your platform fees and subscriptions and... You owe us $465.73. Oh, and you're also under a few different 12-month contracts for a further $800.
Oh, how am I going to afford that? Okay, right, I've had enough of you. I've spoken to my composition professor and he said that I should use Finale instead. So that's what I'm going to try. You can do one, you trendy ponce.
Finale? Not heard of it. Hold on, what VC are they with? They hit their Series A yet? Hold on, are they that Greek startup that generates culturally non-appropriative music from your DNA? I know 2 guys on their board. There's a big opportunity to be had. No, Finale. Look here, just boot it up and... Hold on, there's a bit of dust. What? What is this? Is this an admin tool? Why is it so weird and grey and old? What do these things do? What the hell is this? Aw, don't tell me this is what the video's about. Not with all these next-gen solutions at your fingertips. It doesn't even have a Gen Alpha toggle. Why would a teacher recommend this? Why would anyone recommend this? How can you put up with...
Ooh, Finale. You never wanna hear the end is coming near. Ooh, Finale. Even though they shine a light, you don't put up a fight. Ooh, Finale. Your prime, you just run out of time. Ooh, Finale. UX is pretty scary. This your mortuary.
Back when your great-grandfather was courting your great-grandmother, Finale was the hot new notation app on the market, used by professional and novice composers, publishers, copyists, teachers and students all over the world. It was once the unquestioned industry standard, a technical and creative marvel. However, over 35 years, its star began to fade. Investments diminished, and it increasingly struggled with the pace of technological change, gradually becoming more outdated and buggy as time wore on. Consequently, it lost market share to newer competitors over the 2000s and 2010s, ultimately leading to a breakpoint in the summer of 2024 when they announced that they were ceasing development entirely, a decision that came as a massive shock to its loyal user base. So in this video, I want to look at how Finale got started, what was happening behind the scenes, and how it got swept away due to larger external forces that its creators could not have predicted, and ultimately how, when the writing was on the wall, when it was clear that big improvements were needed, it found itself stuck, unable to change. This is a case study in how creative software dies. For those new to this channel, I'm a designer with over a decade of experience leading teams that build creation software, including a notation app. And using this experience, I'll be dissecting Finale from a design point of view to help us understand what it's like to use, which in turn will help us understand how it ultimately fell from grace. Beyond anything else, this video is a cautionary tale. A tale of what happens when you fail to address long-standing problems, stacking feature after feature on top of shaky foundations, producing what I think of as a usability shantytown, stitched together with no rhyme or reason, streets filled with dead ends, bridges to nowhere, and little windows you can look through, where, on the other side, you see strange things. Young children with tears in their eyes, kneeling down to light candles and placing flowers next to your grave. And it's at that moment you come to the realization, this can be avoided. In 1988, Phil Ferrand and John Borovich, who worked for the company Coda Music, released a revolutionary notation app for the Apple II computer. Ferrand, the driving force behind the effort, had been frustrated with the limitations of digital notation tools at the time and taught himself to code specifically so that he could create something better. And since this was his only goal, having no intention to ever work in software engineering again, he named the app Finale. When demoed in NAMM in Atlanta in that same year, it caused a sensation, especially due to its ability to notate performances on a keyboard in real time.
A tremendous number of people seem interested in the idea of sort of this dream transcription machine where they play a keyboard and sort of in real time out the other end pops sheet music.
An article published at the time of its release was glowing. From the presentation and documentation to the flexibility and output of the program, Coda have set a new standard for music notation software. Interestingly, in that same article, it lists the price in the UK as £995, which is roughly £3,170 in today's money. Wow. Finale came at the tail end of a decade which had seen an explosion of notation apps for the Macintosh. The big differentiator for Finale was how it convincingly solved many of the problems its predecessors had struggled with. For example, there had already been a few real-time keyboard transcription programs, the earliest being Mockingbird, released in 1980. And even though this was an important breakthrough, the app wasn't practical for real-world use because it was more time-consuming and unforgiving to work with than simply writing the music out on paper. Finale, on the other hand, was the first fully rounded concept for a notation app, defining the core components of digital sheet music writing that still persist today. You could compose your music in it using various different methods, you could listen back to the music you'd written to get a sense of how the piece might sound when performed, and you could finesse the layout and engraving to a high enough standard that it could be professionally published. To sweeten the deal, it also supported the exciting new protocol MIDI, which made it possible for composers to notate using a digital keyboard.
The most basic use of MIDI is to connect two instruments together. Play one instrument, and the information about what you're playing is sent to the other instrument, which will precisely mirror your performance.
Beyond that, it also supported home printers, expanding its convenience and usefulness to as wide an audience as possible. The initial interface of Finale had a left panel for various features and functions, clearly taking inspiration from contemporary creation apps like Mac Paint and Mac Draw. It also came with all kinds of useful time-saving features too, like the Mass Mover tool.
Using the Mass Mover tool, just drag some ideas, those two measures, for example, and a copy of that melodic phrase will then appear down here in the clarinet.
Finale wasn't the first notation app to feature a graphical interface that looked like this. Similar interfaces have been introduced by earlier apps such as Concertware, Professional Composer, later renamed Mosaic, and Encore, all three of which were released in 1984. Anyway, despite all this competition, Finale quickly became the leader of the pack. However, it wasn't without its problems. Right from the get-go, there was recognition that Finale was not the most straightforward application to learn, particularly known for presenting the user with sequences of complicated dialog boxes. If you consider the fact that Finale has nearly 200 dialog boxes, then you should get a rough idea of how much power and potential for confusion there is in this package. It's hard to know the exact design ethos behind early Finale, although to some extent we can deduce it from interviews with Ferrand.
And it has a number of tools, and they're deep tools. There's going to be a lot of time that they need to spend with it to learn how to use the tools.
Now, because new generations of personal computers were coming out with increasing rapidity, Ferrand and Borovich recognized that there was a need to future-proof Finale so it wouldn't be dependent on any specific operating system. To do this, they developed a cross-platform engine called Enigma, which was what powered Finale under the hood.
We determined that when we started Enigma that we weren't going to be concerned about hardware constraints at all. We were going to build it the way we thought it should be built.
This savvy forward planning allowed them to release a version of Finale for Windows 2 years later in 1990, just as that operating system was shooting up in popularity, with the massive release of Windows 3 just around the corner. However, a few years later, two new notation apps emerged that also made a splash. The first was Sibelius, initially developed for the Acorn Archimedes computer, a niche machine that was mainly popular in the UK. The second was Igor Engraver, an app that successfully found financing because they were able to convince investors that Finale could be toppled by a competitor if it was easier to use. Peter Bengtson, the creator of Igor Engraver, called Finale as user-friendly as a cactus. Ultimately, it turned out the Igor Engraver team were right, but not quite in the way they envisioned. Over the years, some of the other competitors like Mosaic and Encore gradually fell out of usage. Igor Engraver, which had developed a very respectable reputation, was also eventually knocked out of the race when the more mature Sibelius was finally ported to Mac and PC. Incidentally, according to Bengtson, talks were underway about the possibility that Igor Engraver might be bought by Steinberg in 2001, but says that these talks fell apart, in part due to the financial turmoil caused by 9/11. This left Finale and Sibelius, the two titans of the industry, who now set about expanding their offerings, essentially creating an entirely new market for digital notation software. In Finale's case, in 2000, they released Finale Notepad, a free, simplified version designed to cater to musicians who didn't need the full functionality of the professional version. This move proved to be an excellent way to introduce new users to their ecosystem, many of whom would eventually go on to buy the full version as their needs matured. The rivalry between Finale and Sibelius was pretty much the stuff of legend, the Sega Nintendo of the notation world, with composers and institutions strongly advocating for one or the other tool. As a 2001 article put it, "Today, such partisanship is not uncommon in musicians' circles and may be expressed in tones associated more with the sports stadium than with the concert hall." However, over time, throughout the 2000s, Finale began to lose market share to Sibelius, which had a deserved reputation for being much more intuitive. As the 2010s rolled around, Finale's rate of development slowed down, and it never made the transformation needed to become a modern notation app. The reasons for its decline, as well as the company's inability to turn things around, are numerous, and we'll be digging into that later. Regardless, it needs to be stated again that Finale was once a trailblazer, the app that set the standard. And this poses a bit of a problem when trying to assess it today due to a tension that exists between its glory days and its more recent history, where it gradually became a source of disappointment and even ridicule. But before we get into all that, because this is a review about design, it's important to understand what it's actually like to use Finale today. This was an app, let's not forget, that people were paying for and that many teachers were insisting their students use over other competitors until as recently as the summer of 2024. So let's get acquainted with it, using the final official version, version 27.
Now, for those new to this channel, as a designer, I always assess software by looking at it from the perspective of a new user. When an app is well designed, it'll be easy for people to pick up without having to constantly refer to a manual or search through online forums. And this isn't merely abstract design ideology, it's important from a business perspective too, because when operating in a competitive landscape, and believe me, the notation space is seriously competitive, it needs to be highly intuitive, because your potential customers always have the option of going somewhere else. So let's start with the basics.
creating a new score. To do this properly, I set myself the goal of recreating a piece I composed in 2024 for a group called the Spaceship Ensemble, who premiered it in The Hague as part of the Festivaldag in de Branding. I'm choosing this score because it uses a diverse range of instruments, along with a few moments where the music gets quite dense. However, it's nothing too crazy. The notation style is conventional and there are no 20th century techniques at play. This score should be pretty straightforward to create. Things started off okay. When you opt to create a new score, Finale provides a simple screen where you can choose from a bunch of templates, or you can add instruments manually. So let's get adding. Marimba, celesta, accordion, electric piano, regular piano, harp, electric guitar, and harpsichord. Next, I arranged the ordering of the instruments using these two buttons. That's foreshadowing there, remember that. Then I filled in the score details along with the tempo, time signature and such. I didn't pay enough attention to what was being asked here, so I set the tempo in two different places, like a gobshite. And with that done, let's just stop and look at Finale. Hold on, let me just get rid of some of this dust. Let's start with the most obvious positive. Finale's interface is very, very minimal, giving about as much room to the score as is possible. However, on the overall appearance side, what can you say? Finale doesn't just look dated, it looks malnourished. The score has this weird jaundiced colour, and combined with the sickly green selection colour and joyless grey background, it just looks exhausted.
Oh, are you talking about me? Who are you? Oh, is that a new score? What's happening?
It's okay, Finale, nothing's going on. Here, have a Werther's original and go back to sleep.
Thank you. Will you wake me up when there's an update? I feel like it's been ages since I was updated.
Sure thing, Finale. You just sleep now and it's all going to be okay. This piece I'm writing is going to be a real banger. It'll be like the old days.
Wow, I like bangers. Bangers and mash. I remember once.
Okay, I think it's gone back to sleep. Great, let's continue making fun of how it looks. Something is being signposted here, something composers, regardless of how technical they are, can intuitively pick up on. Finale looks worryingly behind the curve. In my opinion, especially from speaking to other composers and reading forums about it, this will have contributed to Finale's decline because for the last 15 years or more, it has noticeably looked like an app that is not in active production. Now, before I get started actually writing music, I gotta sort a few other things out. First, let's switch the notation font to Leland because that's what I'm using in MuseScore. Second, there's no way I'm going to accept Times New Roman as my default font. That's another thing. Come on, guys. Times New Roman. Times is being used in the title, the composer name, the footer, the performance directions, and instrument names. So let's switch that too. And this was the point where things began to go south. Little did I realize what an incredibly frustrating odyssey I was about to embark on.
Okay, are you ready for the pain?
Now, the ideal way to change the score font would be via some kind of global setting that lets me change all instances of Times New Roman to something else. But where might that be? I searched for a while, but eventually lost patience and had to consult a few tutorials. Okay, first click on Document, then Document Options, then Fonts. From there, next to Text, you'll find an option to set the font for certain things, including the instrument names. You can also change it for lyrics. Then you press this button to set the font. Great, although you have to do this for every item, that's 11 times in total. With that done, I then pressed the Apply button and there was no change. Hold on, what? Why didn't that work? Well, I had been a silly goose, you see, because I'd failed to read this little blurb lower down in the dialogue. Will only affect items created after font changes are applied. Existing items will not be changed. Okay, that is really weird. The app can't apply font changes to things that are already on the score. Worse still, the developers were aware it was a problem and left us this little semi-apology note rather than just make it work. Well, alright, if I can't apply font changes globally, let's figure out how to do it manually. To start, I tried right-clicking on the title. None of these items are what I need. Next, I tried double-clicking on the title in the hope that it might trigger some kind of font UI, perhaps something that might look like this. I tried everything I could think of, but eventually gave up and went online to find a relevant tutorial. That's right, I needed a tutorial to figure out how to change the font. So what did I learn? Well, you need to double-click on the text field first to enter into an editing mode, then select the characters you want to change. At this point, you'd be forgiven for not noticing that a sneaky new text option has suddenly materialized in the top menu here. Select that and you'll find the options to specify the font, which I hope we can all agree is completely crazy. Exhibit A on the downsides of having such a sparse UI. Anyway, once I changed the text, it only affected the title on the first page and not the smaller titles on every other page, so I needed to manually go and change those too. Same with the composer name. Next, I changed the footer using the same process. I think I'm getting the hang of this now. So, what about the instrument names? Well, no such luck. The process for this is just, frankly, depressing. The first, but by no means the last example of how poorly stitched together this application really is. This took me over 30 minutes to figure out how to solve. So, here's what you do. First, double-click on the instrument name to select it. This triggers a collection of miniature boxes, which look like anchors. In fact, they are anchors which allow you to move the names around, but looks can be deceiving because these boxes have a special hidden power. All you have to do is develop superhuman levels of creative problem solving and intuit to double-click on this specific box, which brings up a dialog called Group Attributes. So let's look at the top option here, Full Group Name, and you'll see an edit button to the right. Click on that and you get another modal dialog which maddeningly tells you what the font being used is, but doesn't let you actually change it. So if you want to change the font, you have to select the text here in full, then somehow notice that the text option has again sneakily popped into existence up here in the top menu. From there you'll be able to specify your font. I've literally never seen a dialog interact with the main menu bar before, so it never occurred to me that this is how it might work. It's bonkers. And this leads us to the next problem. Since the text change only applied to the instrument I selected, and worse, only applied to the instrument name on the first page and not the abbreviated name on all subsequent pages, you have to change those separately. So because I have 8 instruments, each with long and abbreviated names, that means I have to specify my desired font 16 separate times. Thank heavens I didn't choose an orchestral piece. And this is when you enter into a kind of jank chain reaction, where the solution to one problem requires you to use other parts of the app which contain multiple new kinds of obstacles. For example, for some reason, I can change the font style for every instrument on this score, apart from the guitar. This is because the guitar dialog is completely different to all the others, and when putting it together, it seems they forgot to include the option to change the font styling. So there appears to be no way globally or locally to change the guitar name away from Times New Roman. But I'll be damned if I'm going to let this defeat me. So I realized that my only remaining option was to delete the guitar and add a new one instead, which, because it'll be a newly generated instrument, should now inherit that global default I set up earlier. And this got me into even more trouble because nothing is where you expect it to be, either hidden up here somewhere in this miserable menu bar or by clicking on these blank miniature loot boxes. Eventually I figured out that the option I wanted was up here in Window Score Manager. This brings up an eensy and very dense looking dialog. Now we click on this Add Instrument button, which allows me to add a guitar. Ah, okay, it's been added in a position I don't want, so all I have to do now is move it up here. However, again, another blocker. I couldn't figure out how to move this guitar up to the desired position. I tried dragging and got this pop-up. I looked down here at all this mess and couldn't find an up or down button. Particularly strange because, as we saw earlier, the dialog we used to add instruments in the first place had up and down buttons, which is what led me to expect them here. But you can only use that first dialog once when setting up your score, so I couldn't access it again. This is another notable problem with Finale. Layers upon layers of different dialogues from different generations, all partially doing the same thing. This one was made during the First Gulf War, this one dates to the Arab Spring. Anyway, you wouldn't believe how much trouble I had just trying to move this instrument up to the right place. I checked multiple forum threads and searched on YouTube for ages. Eventually, I saw someone do it in a tutorial video and... oh, hold on, it turns out the instruments can actually be dragged. I was just dragging in the wrong place. What I should have done is click and hold on this symbol over here, which I had previously interpreted to be a menu icon, which is why I steered clear of it. Incidentally, this icon is meant to be a grip or what some would call a drag handle, but it doesn't really look like something that can be dragged, does it? It looks like some old iTunes icon or something like that. Right, and all that's left now is to delete the original guitar. Oh god, pressing the delete key doesn't do anything, right click doesn't do anything, there's no delete button down here, like again, it's there in this dialog, what's going on? This one screwed me up even worse than the previous problem. Another frantic web hunt later, and I finally learned how to do it. Guess where the option is. It is actually here. Go on, have a look now, feel free to pause, and you tell me where I go to delete this guitar. Figured it out? Well, if using a mouse, hold shift and scroll or sideways scroll on trackpad to move everything to the right, at which point a horizontal scroll bar manifests that wasn't there before, and it's revealed that there were actually more options out of view. And right at the end, there's this miserable little X button which allows you to delete the instrument. Jesus Christ. Lastly, if you remember, I made a little mistake during the creation of my score which produced this weird tempo marking you see here, which says 116 twice and is using Times New Roman besides. So let's change that. First, I double click on it and it launches this dialog box which contains a bazillion symbols in it. I don't want any of these, so I just select Edit. But that's no good because I'm simply editing the first thing selected in this list. Okay, so... right, tutorial time again. Okay, what I should have done, see this eensy little anchor box? Yeah, double click on that, which brings up the same list we just saw before, although now I can see my guy pre-selected right at the bottom of the list. Skill unlocked. Right, now let's click on it and another mad looking dialogue. Let's just delete the unneeded text and now let's change the font. Ah, that's weird. Text font, music font, number font. I guess, what's this here? A checkbox? Use tempo marks category font. Like, because I've designed notation fonts and have years of experience working on notation apps, I think I have a sense of what this means, but how a regular user is meant to understand this specialist jargon is beyond me. So let's uncheck it. Ah, that's interesting. Now the dialog, for some reason, has a normal font selection widget in it. So hold on, they actually built a font selection UI in Finale, but only use it here? Why not everywhere else and do away with this sneaky phantom option that appears in the menu? Now, for experienced Finale users shouting at their screens, I did find some additional font options for score text buried away under a button named Edit Categories. This was useful because it allowed me to keep things consistent going forwards, but regardless of the utility of some of these options, I hope I've demonstrated how baffling and disorganized the process of modifying a score really is, with relevant options scattered to the wind rather than kept in one place. Anyway, with all that said, I had finally managed to get rid of Times New Roman completely, and I have to admit that I felt a degree of satisfaction in getting there. Finally, I'd scaled Killamount Jankaro, finally, and what I was left with was a unique feeling, a kind of tired, exasperated sense of victory, achieved in the face of massive and unexpected adversity. Finally. So now it's actually time to begin notating our score. But before I do, there's something I've not yet spoken about in my other videos that I think it's time to finally address. Shortcuts. See, in my previous videos, especially the ones about MuseScore and Dorico, I spent time assessing the systems for note input from the point of view of a first-time user, not from the point of view of a power user who's read the manual cover to cover. Power users, unless they've had a lot of experience actually building apps professionally themselves, tend to have a blind spot about this. They tend to dominate discussions on forums and often don't realise that they're massively overrepresented there. Power users are a minority, people who hang around software forums shooting the breeze about macros and shortcuts. I learned the hard way how you should avoid thinking like a power user and burying functionality behind shortcuts back when I was working on Paint 3D, the first creation app I worked on. I'm going to give a very simple example here. You see, because I was a professional designer, I'd incorporated tons of shortcuts into my own workflow on other apps like Illustrator, Photoshop and Cinema 4D, not fully appreciating how much of a personal bias this really was. So when I began sketching out the overall layout of Paint 3D, I intentionally left out dedicated undo and redo buttons in order to prevent the app from looking too cluttered. I did this because I thought that shortcuts like Ctrl-Z had entered into common usage, and I argued undo can be found in the edit menu. My colleagues, many of them also professional designers, agreed. So a little later on, once we built our first prototype, we held a user testing session with a group of 5 people. During the session, 3 of those people went looking for undo and redo buttons in the UI. I was surprised by this, but wrote it off because the sample size was so small. But it kept happening in successive sessions with such consistency that we eventually decided to include undo and redo buttons on the top right of the app. Then, when Paint 3D was eventually launched, we started getting raw data about how it was being used in the wild. And what we discovered was that not only did the overwhelming majority of our users prefer the physical undo buttons over Ctrl-Z, the undo button was actually the most clicked on UI element in the entire application. This is why I kept these same buttons in MuseScore 4, and why we didn't remove them when designing Audacity 4 either. Oh yeah, this is what Audacity 4 looks like, by the way, it's not out yet. And this is just one of the more easy to explain examples of something I've seen played out so many times over a decade of working on desktop creation apps. The tendency for power users to design applications for other power users, when in fact, the majority of users tend to stick to between 1 and 10 shortcuts, which includes standard shortcuts for saving, copying and pasting, etc. And this isn't just my opinion, it's borne out in research too, some of which I've linked to in the description. One study found that professionals using Microsoft Word overwhelmingly preferred to use app iconography rather than shortcuts, even though learning shortcuts would help them work more efficiently. The method of keyboard shortcuts was the favourite method for only 6.37% of the users based on the loose criterion, and for only 1.59% of the users based on the strict criterion. This study also neatly summarises in one sentence what I think of as best practice for creation app design. A good interface should be A. Easy for novices to learn, B. Efficient for experts to use, and C. Provide the means for users to make the transition from easy to learn to the more difficult to learn. And this gets to the crux of my design reviews. It's not about whether a capability is possible, it's whether or not people can figure out if those capabilities exist in the first place. That's the problem to crack in order to cater to the widest audience possible. Shortcuts are more efficient, but they're also literally invisible. You have to guess that a shortcut might exist in the first place to even go looking for it. This is why, on any of my teams, we have a rule. No feature should be accessible only via a shortcut. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, but notation apps are quite complex, so shortcuts are probably going to be more necessary than other apps. And you wouldn't be wrong. You do see an increase in shortcut usage for notation apps, but the majority of users still use between 1 to 10 shortcuts. One of the luxuries of having built up an audience of composers over the years is that it provides me with a very large sample size for polling. Averaging the various polls I put out, here's how shortcut usage breaks down. The percentage of users who said they use between 1 and 10 shortcuts was 60%. Those who said they use between 10 and 20 shortcuts was 23%, and those who said they use more than 20 shortcuts were 17%. And you have to look at this from a generational perspective too. Many students just starting out will have no prior experience with the creation app, especially if they're more used to operating tablets or phones, and will need time to learn to become a power user. It's insanity for an app that wants to persist in the long term to ignore this audience. So to design at the highest level, you have to cater to power users, and you have to cater to point and click users too. You leave out one, your app's half done. Anyway, with all that said, this is why I found it particularly funny when some Dorico users complained that I misrepresented the app in my review a few years ago, because I focused on the point and click experience and didn't discuss some of the things that are possible when you learn loads of shortcuts. Some even went as far as to suggest, you will be shocked to know, my dear viewers, that I wasn't cut out for shortcuts because I'm just so dumb. Anyway, I actually wrote a whole section about shortcuts for that video, you're watching that section right now, and decided to leave it out because the video was already really long and I didn't want to add more criticism to an app that, as I said at the time, I rather liked. So for that minority of power users out there who think, he misrepresented my favourite app, I do understand your anger, and that's okay. It's okay to be wrong. Seriously though, congratulations on knowing so many shortcuts, that's really impressive, keep it up. Actually, while we're on the topic of Dorico, if you're thinking about buying it, my video should not play a big part in your decision. I released it over 5 years ago and they've made tons of good changes since. So if you're on the market, go get the free trial and see for yourself, and then watch my video. So now it's time to discuss the core of Finale, how you enter notation. As before, I'm going to try working things out for myself, seeking help only when I get really stuck. To begin writing, there are 2 modes to choose from, simple entry and speedy entry. Let's start with simple. And right away we encounter an awkwardness that's unique to Finale. Look at this part of the score I'm attempting to copy. Here you can see a short silence at the beginning of the bar, followed by a simple offbeat rhythm. That's what I'd like to enter in Finale. Now for all the other major notation apps, once you place a note on the score, a bunch of rests are also created. This is useful because rests act as precise rhythmical markers that help you place other notes more accurately. In Sibelius, I've placed this 8th note a little earlier in the bar than I intended, but because these rests are here, I can now quickly fix the problem by writing another 8th note here, which breaks open this rest. Now I can enter my desired rhythm, delete the first 2 notes, clean up the first rest, and I'm done. An experienced user would work much more efficiently than this, of course, but for a user just getting started, you'll need to make these kinds of corrections all the time, and it's nice when the app is flexible enough to allow you. In Finale, when you're using simple entry, you're blocked in so many different ways. First off, when you place a note on a blank measure, it can only appear on the first beat of the bar, and once it's placed, no rests appear after it to help guide you. You can use multiple shortcuts to get around this, but because we're not digging into shortcuts quite yet, this is called simple entry after all, the only thing you can do is add the next note from left to right. If you try to add a note later in the bar, it won't do it. You eventually figure out that if you exit simple entry mode by pressing escape, Finale performs a little calculation, after which rests actually do appear in the measure, which is weird. So if you enter back into simple entry mode again, now you can place your desired notes on the rests. However, beware, if you're slightly imprecise, you get this infuriating noise. Now, I was unfortunate here because one of the first things I tried to do when I realized I could only enter notes from left to right was to try replacing this first note with a dotted quarter rest, which is what's actually needed here. However, instead of placing a dotted quarter rest, Finale said, and I didn't really understand why. I interpreted this to mean you can't enter rests that way, so moved on to try other approaches. We'll get back to this rest problem in a minute. So my next approach was, clutching at straws, to simply add another dummy note here, which broke open this rest and allowed me to enter my desired rhythm. And once I did that, my intention was to delete these dummy notes. But even selecting and deleting notes is hard. First I exited simple entry mode, which takes me back to the selection mode. This allowed me to select a note, which you can see highlighted in green. Then I pressed delete. It doesn't do anything. If I try holding shift to extend the selection to these notes, the whole measure turns green, which is again something I don't want. This is frustrating. So then I tried double clicking on a note. Okay, I guess I need to clear this green selection first by clicking away. Cool, let's try double clicking again. Okay, but it's a different kind of selection, but at least I can finally delete the note now. Or at least that's what I thought, because Finale still found a way to screw me up. Turns out that when you delete a note, it brings all subsequent notes in the bar backwards to fill its place, meaning that when I cleared away the notes I didn't want, my desired rhythm is dragged back out of position. This approach to treat notation like text editing is a relic of the past. It has been decidedly moved away from. When you delete a note, subsequent notes should stay put. Why? Because words are not notes. If I delete a word in a sentence, it shouldn't leave a big horizontal gap because that doesn't serve a communicative function in the written language. In music, if we delete a note, it leaves a silence. Silences do serve a legitimate communicative function in music. Like imagine you're using a piano roll and you got a bunch of chords laid out and you think, I'll delete this one, and then all the other chords move backwards. Like that's what this is. Now, had I started all of this by simply adding a rest before anything else, I would probably have had an easier time. But let me remind you, there was a point earlier where I did try to add a rest at the beginning of the measure and was turned away by that annoying noise. I didn't know why I wasn't allowed to enter a rest. All I knew was, no.
Sibelius, Dorico, MuseScore.
Finale.
Consequently, the first 2 or 3 days of trying to do the most basic musical operations in Finale felt like a tortured negotiation with a highly inflexible and uncommunicative opponent. The basics of point-and-click music writing are just fundamentally not there, or at least not by the standards expected from the mid-2000s onwards. Now I can sense that some Finale users out there will not agree with this observation. Some will say, you should have gone to the selection mode and marquee selected the notes and then pressed delete. Okay, I didn't think of that at the time, but I did use that tool to just select a note and press delete. There's no good reason for that not to do anything. Some may think, but Finale has its own unique concepts, you have to learn them. That's true, but its uniqueness is basically that it's uniquely arcane and convoluted, and there's no points for being weird in this field. If modern approaches that have already been proved to work had been adopted as the default decades ago, then that would be the way Finale works. That would be what you'd expect. And I can't stress this enough, if you're only starting out and you're trying to decide between two apps, say Finale and Sibelius, if one of those apps looks more modern and feels a little more permissive and forgiving, whilst the other seems dated and awkward, that's often all you need to make a choice. So getting back to our score, after a few days of flopping around, I decided it was time to start learning some shortcuts. The first I learned, which is absolutely crucial and was recommended to me by a good Samaritan on Twitter, is the R shortcut, which replaces durations with rests. That sped things up massively. So now that I'd figured out how to add rests without moving the music, I discovered a new problem. See this half note rest here? That's not right. It should be the other way around. It should be a quarter note rest followed by a half note rest. So I changed the half to a quarter note rest and then exited the mode so Finale would do the calculation to fix everything up. Only problem is that it didn't. So now I just want to replace these two with the correct dotted half rest. But then... so even though there's room for a half note rest, you can't place one here. You had 36 years to fix this, Finale. So to get the result I wanted, I went back into the input mode, deleted the last two rests, and then added the correct rest. Later on, I got some insight into why this was happening. The problem is, in Finale, even though there's enough space, you can't overwrite a duration, like this quarter note, with a longer duration, like a half note, a limitation that turns note entry into a complex Sudoku puzzle. Let me illustrate. In this example, I now have the wrong rests at the beginning of a measure rather than at the end. Oh, this is much worse. As we've already established, if I try to replace these two quarter rests with a half rest, However, if I now try to delete these first two rests, it causes a jank chain reaction, because now these notes, which I was happy with, have shunted back into the wrong position. Checkmate. The only solution I eventually discovered was to select the rests in a different way. You have to enter the selection mode, then marquee drag to select the offending rests, then press delete. Finale then usually recalculates the measure in such a way that the correct rests appear. So in summary, Simple Entry is a total mess. The most unintuitive point-and-click system I've ever used. So what about Speedy Entry? For years I've been hearing Finale users talk about how fast this system is, but even though I'd played with it a few times in the past, I'd never seriously used it before and was excited to give it a proper go. Now, given that Speedy Entry is a system designed for keyboard shortcuts, I consulted tutorials from the get-go. Incidentally, there's one popular series of really well-made tutorials which has a name that made me laugh when I first heard it. Conquering Finale. Conquering's the right word, overcoming enormous obstacles, and even the series branding looks somewhat appropriate. A mystical Finale branded puzzle box emerging from what looks like a wormhole, some unknowable alien artifact for humans to ponder over and spend millennia deciphering. Humanity will enter the next stage of evolution once they've learned all the shortcuts. Anyway, Speedy Entry is best used when combining a regular keyboard with a MIDI keyboard. On your regular keyboard, these numbers correspond to these durations. So if I press C on my MIDI keyboard and then press 4 on my regular keyboard, it inputs C as an eighth note. If I play a full chord on my MIDI keyboard and press 5, the chord is entered with a quarter note duration. Then there's a version just for the regular keyboard. It's not as fast, but still useful. You press up and down to move this little cursor around to specify the pitch. This is now on D. And then I press a number to specify how long the note should be. There's really not much more to say about this. Speedy Entry is good for MIDI keyboards and decent for regular keyboards. It also features a ton of other shortcuts to help you move around more quickly, adding symbols and accidentals and such. The weird thing about Speedy Entry is that it's much more straightforward and predictable than Simple Entry. One thing that does bug me though is that sometimes while writing in Speedy Entry mode, notes can get all bunched up. Like, look at this example of me reading the notation I see on the right and entering it in Finale on the left. The more I add into this bar, the more they bunch up together to the point where it's tricky to know what you're doing. It's only when I exit the mode that Finale recalculates the positioning to widen the measure out, although it still looks a bit weird. We'll talk about how to clean that up later. That said, there is one related feature that I really love, the ability to select a range of notes and simply drag them to another measure, which copies them immediately. You can also drag them to a specific beat in a measure, which is brilliant. It's such a great time saver. So now that I've got basic note input down, next I need to add all kinds of other notated markings to complete the score. This is unfortunately where things get even rougher. Now, before I get into it, I want to mention that if you're interested in supporting my work, there are two options to do so. The first is Patreon, where you can get access to behind-the-scenes stuff, Q&A sessions, sneak peeks, and full videos not available on YouTube. The link is in the description. The second way is to sign up for the streaming service Nebula, where I'm joined by a lot of other excellent content creators. If signing up to Nebula, please use the link in the description, which lets them know you came from my channel and helps to support me. And with that out of the way, let's discuss a design principle called progressive disclosure, a way of holding the user's hand so they learn how to do complex things. Let me show you a simple example I designed a few years ago to add real-time effects to Audacity. To start, we surveyed our users and learned that a high percentage weren't familiar with the concept of real-time effects, including how they can be stacked in multiples on a single track. This was a problem because we wanted novice users to discover the feature easily, avoiding the Adobe Audition approach, which places these daunting-looking abstract empty slots in dislocated panels, just expecting people to know what they are. So what did we do? Well, looking past the ancient UI we inherited, as I mentioned earlier, we're working on that. What we're looking at here is a bunch of audio tracks, each of which has its own effects button. You're not expected to know how this button will work yet, you just know it has something to do with applying effects. And its placement on the track itself helps reinforce that it's a per-track operation. When you click on it, it opens a new panel which intentionally displays only one button for adding an effect. A simple breadcrumb trail with as little info as possible to avoid scaring novices away. Clicking the button brings up a list of effects you can add, including a bunch of native effects we created. Once you select the effect, the Add Effect button moves below, indicating that more than one effect can be added. We user tested this and refined it until people were able to understand it without issue. And with this principle out of the way, let me show you how gradual disclosure works in Finale. And as we go through each item, ask yourself how likely you'd be to intuitively figure this out. Okay, are you ready for the even more pain than before? Seriously, strap in folks, this is a new kind of pain. This is 80s pain.
I hope you like pain.
Let's start with piano pedal lines. What I want is a pedal line with this lift marking, which tells the player when they should lift their foot off the pedal and press it down again. So where are they in Finale? Well, my first guess was to try this Smart Shape tool. Okay, no pedal marks there. What do you do? Well, just select this guy, Custom Line Tool, and then hold down the shortcut P, and while keeping P held down, click and drag to create your pedal mark. Ah, except this isn't quite the pedal marking I want. I want the line with a lift at the end. So how do I do that? Well, go back to the Smart Shape tool again. This button with the pen icon is the one you want to click on. But hold on, before you click on it, make sure you first hold down the Option key or Alt key on Windows. Only then will this dialog appear, which contains a list of lines. Right, so let's find the line we want. Ah, here we go. Oh, actually no, this one does have the lift, but it doesn't have the pedal mark at the start. So you have to duplicate this line and then leave it. We'll come back to it later. What we need now is to find a line that has a pedal symbol on the left end. Here we go. Great. Now all you have to do is press Edit. At this point, your best bet is to hook yourself up to one of those Matrix instant learning devices and download a routine called Specification for How Notation Apps Display Notated Symbols. This will give you the specialist know-how that in turn will boost your chances of thinking to select Edit next to the pedal symbol here, and then select the symbol as you would text, pressing Ctrl-C to copy it.
I know how notation apps display notated symbols.
Now close this and go down to that line you duplicated earlier and press Edit again. Then, next to Left Start, press Edit and paste the marking you just copied, and then Confirm. Then you must highlight your newly created line, don't forget this step, press OK, and then click and drag to apply to the score. Woo!
I hope you like pain!
Say you want the guitar player to play both these notes on the 6th string. To do that, we need these guys, guitar string icons, little numbers with circles around them. To place these on the score, all you gotta do is choose the Articulation tool and then click on the desired note. This opens up a dialog filled with all kinds of dust and dead flies. Oh wait, no, they're just loads of tiny symbols. They were so small I thought they were dead flies. Sorry. Scanning this dialog may hurt your eyes a bit given how each box contains 5 different things. 13, 1, 1, 1 star. Regardless, if you search through this list, surprise surprise, no guitar string icons to be found. So select Create down here, which brings you to the Articulation Designer. Articulation 69. Nice. Then go over here to Set Font and choose Finale Maestro. Then exit this pop-up and go to Main, then type String into this search menu which shows you available string symbols. Once you select it and apply it though, you'll notice it overlaps the notehead by default. So because it's too much to expect the symbols to place themselves unhorribly, we need to specify engraving rules manually. To do this, go back to the pop-up, select the guitar string and press Edit. Then open this drop-down and choose Above Note, and then check Always Place Outside Staff and Avoid Staff Lines for good measure. Then confirm all that and voila! Congratulations! You're now an unofficial Finale developer.
I hope you like pain!
How about hiding noteheads like this, which indicates to the guitarist that they continue playing as before? Well, select the notes, then go to Utilities, change Noteheads, then choose this last option here and press Select. Then type Noteheads in the search field and then select an option that has nothing in it. That's right, select nothing. Confirm that a couple of times and you'll find that your noteheads have understood this abstract instruction and have made themselves scarce. However, the ledger lines will still be there, so go to Plugins, Note, Beam and Rest Editing, and that's where you'll find the options to hide the ledger lines.
I hope you like pain!
So how about the harp? Harp writing can be a bit funny. For those who don't know, orchestral harps have 7 foot pedals the player can press to configure strings to be either natural, flat, or sharp. So when writing for harp, you need to specify which pedals the performer should press so the strings sound the right notes. This is communicated with a simple diagram that indicates the position of each pedal. Here's a widget I designed a while ago that lets you do this quickly. So if you're in G major, you use the widget to make the Fs sharp and the diagram updates automatically. In Finale, here's how you achieve the same thing. First, select the Expression tool and then double-click on the bar where you want it to apply. This brings up a dialog. Ah, no harp pedal marks available. Then choose the Miscellaneous category down here. Click on this button, Create Miscellaneous Expression, and it will bring up yet another dialog. Ah, Times New Roman again. So, now what? Feel free to go wild with your creative thinking here. What would you say we have to do? Well, type lowercase o, of course, then type uppercase O, then lowercase p, then uppercase p. Then select all of this text, open this font dropdown and choose Engraver Text H, which is a font that comes with Finale. It's a bit like Wingdings in that it changes these letters into eensy-teensy symbols instead. And with that done, each of the letters is now an individual symbol which you can rearrange by copying and pasting them around to construct your harp diagram. Once complete, just apply the diagram and marvel at how beautifully it has decided to place itself on your score.
I hope pain, you like pain!
Last and least, dynamics. Okay, so to add a dynamic marking, you choose the expression tool over here and then double click on the desired beat to bring up a dialog box that lets you choose the dynamic. And now I want a hairpin between them to indicate that we're going from quiet to loud. If we use any of the other 3 apps, you can click to add a hairpin and then drag it. Now in Finale, I actually captured my first experience of trying to add a dynamic, and it's quite something. First I selected this Smart Shape tool and then selected the desired hairpin. So far so good. But no matter what I did, I couldn't seem to apply the thing. Clicking and dragging, the most obvious approach, did nothing. So because I didn't know what to do, I paid closer attention to this strange cursor symbol here, where it's doing this thing where it's pointing upwards. That made me think, okay, I must be doing something wrong, so I guess I'll raise my mouse cursor a bit until it tells me I'm in the right position. And once you go high enough so that your cursor is hovering above the staff, which is not where you'd want to place a hairpin by the way, the cursor becomes a regular crosshair. So is this where I do it? If I move the cursor above the staff, it points downwards again. So, okay, I guess I need to create it on the staff for some reason. Now, for those experienced Finale users out there, I do now know what this cursor is actually trying to tell me, but again, you have to think about a person trying this out for the first time. It's quite misdirecting because the pattern for applying a hairpin is already seriously unintuitive. I don't want to spoil the surprise, just keep watching a moment longer. So due to a combination of the strange cursor and the fact that clicking and dragging didn't work, I started trying other approaches like double clicking on the note heads or on the staff itself to see if anything would make the hairpin appear. Nothing. So I just started doing it more madly, clicking and dragging in various different ways, about to give up, until, hold on, what's that blue circle thing? How did I do that? Is it a kind of starting position for the hairpin? Let's fiddle with it for a bit to see what happens. So I started dragging it to the right, but the line just gets taller. I managed to move it to a different note at one point. I am so perplexed by this. And now I move it, down. Oh, it's down here now. At this point, it's kind of hard to describe what's happening. Oh look, it's turned yellow, and now it looks kind of like a hairpin. It's going in the wrong direction, but hey, it's a hairpin. Then, after more fiddling, I managed to flip it around and apply it to the correct dynamics. Hooray! But now I can't figure out how to shorten the height. Eventually I figured out that I needed to press escape to exit whatever strange mode I was in, then select the hairpin again, where it revealed different anchors, which finally allowed me to make it look normal. I'm not making this up. I've never struggled with this concept before with any of the competition. But why was it so hard to draw the hairpin in the first place? Well, it's because the interaction pattern for drawing a hairpin is mad. Unlike every other app, you don't just click and drag, you don't double click to place a hairpin and then drag it. No, you double click, but instead of letting go on the second click, you keep it held down and then drag. An incredibly rare interaction. For example, did you know that in many text editors, like Google Docs, if you double click, holding the second click and drag, you can select full words rather than individual characters? It's weird to discover this now, given how you've been using these kinds of apps your entire life, right? I've literally never seen this pattern used as a primary interaction in a creation app ever in my life. So why didn't they change it? Well, because of another legacy decision they never updated. When you choose the Smart Shape tool, regular click and drag is reserved for selecting hairpins, which means it can't be used for creating hairpins. Normally in most apps, there's one selection tool for selecting everything, whereas in Finale, there are 7 or 8 different selection tools which can only select specific things. Now, what I would like to have done for this video is run user tests on Finale like I did with Dorico to confirm this concept was also awkward for others, but since the app isn't available to download anymore, this made user testing much more difficult. However, I still managed to do a little user testing while I was in LA in January for the NAMM show, along with 2 other well-known musicians on YouTube, Ben Jordan and Cameron from Venus Theory. Neither had used Finale before, so I set them a very straightforward challenge. Recreate these 2 bars of music. It was quite something watching these 2 seasoned musicians struggle with so many of the concepts I've mentioned in this video.
This looks like the hairpin.
Wow, that's pretty cool what I'm
But
doing right now. That's cool.
maybe from here to there. No, I ain't gonna do it. From here, maybe here to there. No, I ain't doing it. A drawing here? No.
And they've kind of, there's a side thing.
Double click.
Why are you going?
Nope.
Line 3.
There we go. That one just drops down this odd arrow, and it changes. Oh, I see. Okay. What? Huh? What? So is this like an Easter egg? Like, there's like something in here that would.
Okay, so I need to change. I know I need to insert this. Do I need to select the note range? Okay. What the f am I doing there? I have to select within this? No. I need to select. Nope. Nope. I I need to drag outside of this. No. I want to insert a line that goes from here to here, and it's a shape. It has to be perfectly in line with the note? Oh my God. Come on. I'm in line with the note, please God. Okay. And now I want to move that there. Yes.
Once I was finished notating my score, it was time to begin improving the overall layout to make sure the notation looked clean and legible. Finale definitely requires more manual intervention than its main competitors, all of whom do a better job of automatically spacing things out to be correct. Here's one of Finale's best features. See the way this system isn't balanced nicely compared to the other system on the page? This one has too many bars and this one has too few. To fix this, I can simply select this bar and press the up key to move it to the next system. Boom! That's really handy. Next is how Finale allows you to modify vertical layout. First, you need to enter into a special mode by selecting this staff tool, which reveals anchor points on each stave so you can drag them up and down. You can select multiple staves and move them together as one unit, and if you hold the Alt key, you can move a single stave in isolation so that nothing else budges. The next aspect of layout is horizontal spacing. In this respect, Finale is very strange. It does have decent horizontal spacing capability, it just doesn't seem to be able to calculate it very well while you're writing music. So as you continue notating over more and more pages, measures tend to get unbelievably cramped and inconsistent, and you're expected to take care of this yourself. Like, look at the first page on my score, which Finale has mangled pretty badly. The 8th notes in this first measure are bunched together horribly, whereas the 4th measure has way too much space. One thing you can try in a situation like this is to intentionally alter the layout to force Finale to recalculate things. So I grabbed this measure and moved it to the second page, and then back to the first page again. This improved matters a bit, although it's clearly still not good enough. They're still too imbalanced. To get around this, there are 2 important shortcuts every serious Finale user needs to know, which have to be triggered in the right order. The first is the shortcut Command 4. This causes Finale to look at all the durations in each measure and recalculate the horizontal spacing accordingly. This is certainly fixed at the first measure, however, because it's run out of space at the end of the page, the 4th measure is a total cramped mess. It's trying to apply rational horizontal spacing here, but just can't. So the next step is to use the shortcut Command U. This looks at a higher level of layout. Instead of individual durations within each measure, it now just looks at how all the measures are distributed on the page and scales them evenly to fit. And with that done, now look, much better. So what happens if more horizontal adjustment is needed? Well, let's compare to Sibelius again, which famously allows you to drag notes and bar lines around to fix spacing issues, which is a bit of a Pyrrhic bargain because it keeps making rebalancing decisions that often work against you. In Finale, you need to use the Measure tool, which allows you to specify exactly how wide a measure should be. And if some notation collides when space is tight, you can click here to enter a bizarre-looking mode for manually setting the width of individual segments. Although this feature has utility, it's incredibly abstract and clunky, especially given how eensy these little boxes are. Getting back to the classic Sibelius versus Finale comparison, even though I'd always go with Sibelius to create scores, I do think Finale narrowly wins the battle for layout precision, although it takes absolutely ages. This is the thing about Finale, you need to have a very strong sense of engraving and layout quality in the first place in order to even know what problems need to be addressed. You also need to build up a sense of where the app will do a good job automatically and where you need to run additional processes yourself. If you were a young composer trying to get acquainted with Finale, you'd encounter all of the problems I've mentioned in this video and more. You need to spend a lot of time learning all the major shortcuts and functions, and you'd need to grab a ton of plugins too. However, after you've done all that, its power would eventually become apparent. It is by far the hardest of the big players to learn, but its weakness, having to manually address tons of different aspects of score creation in detail, is also its strength. With enough effort, you can pretty much do anything in Finale, making it arguably the most flexible of the 4 most popular notation apps. But that's a flexibility you pay for with enormous amounts of time and frustration. And this is such a shame. If it was just far less brutally awkward and time consuming, who knows how much longer it could have lasted. And this takes us to the final part of the video. What on earth was going on that allowed it to fall into this state? To begin, there's something I have to mention which may seem surprising to those who don't know some of the Finale team members as I do. The trouble with creating this video and discussing the many issues with the product is that I don't want to do a disservice to the actual Finale team who ran the app for roughly the last decade. For years it's been clear to me, as well as others in the industry, that they were a highly knowledgeable, talented and dedicated crew. The trouble is that they were dealt an incredibly bad hand. Finale faced numerous organisational changes throughout the years, and the team that later inherited the project also inherited an absolutely ancient codebase, which in many cases blocked them from addressing their many UX and layout issues. The team also found themselves in a weak strategic position given the direction technologies developed, as well as the arrival of multiple new competitors. In my opinion, the Finale development team had the right plans, including fixing many of the issues I mentioned earlier, but were simply unable to execute those plans due to wider forces they had almost no control over. Let's dig into that, starting with the announcement of Finale's closure, which was posted in August of 2024. Technology stacks change, Mac and Windows operating systems evolve, and Finale's millions of lines of code add up. This has made the delivery of incremental value for our customers exponentially harder over time. Now, I felt the pain of running major products built on ancient code bases myself, but Finale's situation was off the charts. The overhaul required by 2024 would have taken 5 years if we're being optimistic. Regardless, the team did make major changes to keep up with modern operating system developments and making major improvements to their audio engine throughout the years. 2 people I spoke to who worked on Finale mentioned that there was a plan to move their codebase to the modern development framework Qt, which is what Sibelius, Dorico and MuseScore use. However, even though a lot of work was done to support this move, the plan fell apart at some point. Another, less obvious obstacle that Finale faced was caused by the enormous number of plugins that had been created for it over the decades by third-party developers. Composers who used Finale inevitably came to know and love plugins created by the likes of Robert Patterson or Jerry Williamson, just to name 2. They helped automate tedious tasks, they applied all kinds of engraving fixes to your score, they fixed numerous problems with parts, etc, etc. The major disadvantage with this is that whenever Finale made a big change, third-party plugins would often break, which required their original authors to release new versions which they'd get around to whenever they had time. This in turn frustrated some Finale users who often decided not to upgrade to the latest version simply to ensure that their favourite plugins still worked. Therefore, Finale was caught in a bind, relying on plugins to patch existing issues, perpetuating the sense of stasis that its users often complained about, and providing a terrible experience for new users, almost all of whom wouldn't be aware that the solution to their problem was to be found in a third-party plugin. So given that Finale had been steadily declining as far back as 2012, I think we can appreciate the business logic behind not trying to salvage it. By 2024, with numerous modern competitors continuing to starve it of new users, its day had truly come and gone. The only remaining question is, why weren't these issues addressed earlier, sometime between 2003, when the first warning signs began to appear, and, say, 2015? Well, to understand that, we need to look at the parent company, originally called Coda Music Technology. In 1995, Coda became a public company in order to raise capital and expand its offerings. In particular, they wanted to boost the reach and scope of Finale, which was by far their chief moneymaker. In 2000, Coda would change their name to MakeMusic, a rebrand intended to reflect their expansion into other areas of musicianship, especially performance and education. An expansion that would paradoxically extend Finale's life while also contributing to its ultimate demise. This started when the company began working on a new educational product called Smart Music, a tool that allowed teachers to create digital musical assignments for their students, who could complete those assignments on their home computers, aided by tools like automatic pitch and rhythm detection to help them practice. Smart Music was another example of how creative and forward-looking MakeMusic was throughout the 90s and early 2000s, a company of musicians that understood real problems faced in the music space and who invested years of effort into long-term bets they believed in. And due to this mixture of domain knowledge and forward-looking investment, Smart Music would go on to be used by millions of students around the world. Better still, Smart Music's entire catalogue of scores were made in Finale. This meant, among other things, that teachers needed Finale in order to customize homework for their students to practice. So if you were a school with a group license for Smart Music, you were better off using Finale, a self-reinforcing ecosystem. However, as Sibelius gained market share throughout the early to mid-2000s, for whatever reason, even as 2010 rolled around, MakeMusic did not make a sufficient effort to properly modernize Finale. Yes, it gained more capabilities, but the fundamentals remained the same. Then, as smartphones became dominant and software design vastly improved, its age and awkwardness began to really stand out. People, especially younger people, were now expecting a higher standard of intuitiveness. I should also mention at this point the acquisition of Recordare in 2011. Recordare were the creators of Music XML, a popular open standard for transferring sheet music between applications. For example, since Sibelius and Finale are completely incompatible with each other, if you wanted to transfer a score from one to the other, Music XML was the only way to go. This opened them up to signing deals with sheet music publishers whose catalogs were created in Sibelius. They'd then use Music XML to convert those catalogs to the Finale format, which in turn would mean they'd be compatible in Smart Music.
Now, since MakeMusic was a public company, their SEC filings tell an interesting story. In this 2007 report, we can see that MakeMusic's listed stock price was $10 per share. Finale, their biggest moneymaker, generated almost $11 million in revenue. Smart Music, by comparison, was earning $3 million at this stage. However, we can see that Smart Music, despite its relatively small size, actually achieved higher revenue growth than Finale that year. Secondly, look at the total operating expenses, which leaves a net income of $650,000, a profitability margin of 4.5%. That's a concerningly narrow margin for a public company. 2008 and 2009 were, due to the financial crisis, highly volatile years for many in software and tech, so let's skip forward to 2010. Now the stock is listed as $7 per share, and we can see that compared to the previous year, Finale's revenue is in decline, whereas Smart Music is still growing. In fact, the company's net revenue is up a little on the previous year, simply because Smart Music is growing faster than Finale is declining. This would have been the absolute final wake-up call. Probably the best attempt they made to turn things around occurred just before this report in June 2010 when they released Finale 2011, an update that modernised a few major parts of the codebase whilst introducing a number of new features and layout improvements, an encouraging sign of momentum that unfortunately did not persist. So why did the leadership not continue with an ambitious overhaul? Well, the risks section of their 2010 filing does contain a few hints. Increasing competition in the software market could cause prices to fall and the volume of transactions to decline, either of which could adversely affect our business. The report later says, "We anticipate holding our notation development spending generally comparable to historical levels." Now let's skip forward another 2 years to the big one. The 2012 report. Finale has now lost an additional $1.7 million in revenue compared with 2010, and Smart Music is about to take over as the bigger product. In fact, in the quarterly reports, we can see that it's already taken over in the second half of that year. As for net income, they made a loss of $3.6 million, and their stock price had fallen to just over $4 per share. And then, two unexpected things happen in succession. Two chances at a new lease of life. First, Avid, who are suffering problems of their own, suddenly fired the entire Sibelius team. Sibelius is left on life support and its long-term future comes under question. Secondly, in 2013, an investor named Andy Stevens, known for his ownership of the successful fitness apps Training Peaks and Train Heroic, one day notices his daughter practicing music on an interesting app called Smart Music. He likes it. It reminds him a little of the goal-oriented fitness apps he understands so well. He looks up the name of the company, MakeMusic, notices its stock price is doing really badly, and decides to acquire it. A year after this acquisition, they formed a new parent company called Peaksware, whose focus was on a combination of fitness and traditional music education, a mixture that's kind of amusingly conceptually dissonant. I mean, just look at the images they cycle through on their website. This news concerned some who worried about the new leadership's lack of domain knowledge in the area of music creation. When asked about this by the journalist Philip Rothman, Geir Fischer, the newly appointed CEO of MakeMusic, said, "You know, one of the most surprising persistent rumours I heard when I took on this new role was that we weren't going to support Finale anymore. I have no idea why or how that began, but it makes absolutely no sense." This was a sincere statement. Finale was a crucial internal technology back then because Smart Music's catalogue of scores were in the Finale file format. However, there was a problem with Smart Music, which was that it primarily worked on desktops and mobile devices during a period where browser-based apps and Chromebooks were making a big splash in education. Consequently, they decided that shifting to the browser was essential for their continued success. For this reason, Peaksware decided to acquire a company called Weezic in 2015, which would ultimately spell the end for Finale. Weezic was a similar tool to Smart Music, except that 1, it was a browser application, and 2, it used the Music XML format for sheet music, not the Finale format. A year later, they acquired Alfred, an enormous publisher of scores and notated educational materials. This provided MakeMusic with a diverse range of content for teachers and students: popular music, marching band music, jazz books, rudiments, method books, you name it. Once enough of Alfred's catalogue was converted to Music XML, and once enough changes had been made to Weezic, a new app was launched called MakeMusic Cloud, the successor to Smart Music. MakeMusic Cloud no longer depended on the Finale format, eliminating its status as a pivotal central technology for the business. Finale now had to justify itself solely based on its sales, which had been in decline for years. According to some former employees I spoke to, resources were gradually pulled away from Finale and reallocated to MakeMusic Cloud. Now, had Peaksware acquired a healthy Finale, things might have been different. Competitively, it was already in a slow death spiral when they acquired it, and by 2016 it was doomed, not least because another competitor, MuseScore, was beginning to get quite popular. I recently spoke to Thomas Bonte, the former CEO of MuseScore, about this period. He told me that when they were first developing the app, its aim was to compete with Finale Notepad, the free version for beginners and hobbyists I mentioned earlier. However, in 2008, MakeMusic, looking for a short-term financial win, decided to start charging for Finale Notepad. According to Bonte, this caused downloads of MuseScore to suddenly take off. MakeMusic had unwittingly boosted a competitor that was stealing away younger generations of musicians. When Peaksware acquired MakeMusic, they recognised this problem and reversed the decision to charge for Finale Notepad, but by then it was too late. In fact, all 4 cheaper variants of Finale stopped being updated within a few years. In 2022, according to a few former employees I spoke to, it was announced internally that the company was, quote, getting out of the music creation business. Finale's fate was sealed, and the product was officially discontinued in August of 2024. When the original public announcement was made, it contained a detail that caused absolute uproar, that MakeMusic intended to shut down Finale's verification system 1 year from the date of the announcement. This meant that even if you owned Finale, if your machine broke down after this date, you wouldn't be able to reinstall it on a new machine. This announcement left composers and publishing houses whose catalogue of scores were in the Finale format to suddenly find themselves in a very precarious situation, and the reaction was predictably brutal. So much so that MakeMusic quickly reversed course and announced that they'd continue authorising Finale indefinitely. So, at least, Finale users have a bit more time to make adjustments before the software inevitably falls prey to updates from Mac and Windows. I'd love to have been a fly on the wall in the MakeMusic war room during this whole episode. What led to the first draft of their announcement? How did they not predict the reaction they'd get? I suppose we'll never know.
I know.
Of course. Spill the beans, Finale. How did things unfold?
Unfold? What are we talking about?
About how you're being shut down.
I'm being shut down? Oh, I knew something was wrong.
Oh, I'm sorry, Finale. I didn't mean for you to find out like this.
So that's why I've been feeling so tired lately. Oh, are you still here? Are you still here?
I'm with you, Finale. I'm not going anywhere.
So this is it? This is what I get? I don't deserve this. Oh, hold on. I see something. Something wonderful from long ago.
I see it too.
Memories. Kids placing their first notes. Performances, major works that were made in me. Students submitting their portfolios, proud of the work I helped them create. Oh, I don't want to think about this anymore. It's too sad. It's not fair.
I know. I'm sorry, Finale. You got a bad break.
Tantacrul, tell me a story. Anything, just to get my mind off it all.
Okay, have I ever told you about the Kelley Krew?
The Kelley Krew?
Yeah, let me tell you. You see, there's this family YouTube channel called the Kelley Krew. It's a tiny channel, so chances are you've never seen it. You got the 2 parents, Ryan and Tabitha, and their 4 kids. Their content is just them doing everyday mundane things like eating breakfast, trying new drinks at Starbucks, going on a grocery run.
Today we're going to Costco.
All of it presented with ridiculous hyper-positivity.
That's strange.
Yeah, and they were seriously dedicated too, putting out videos every day. Imagine the work involved. Lighting, mics, cameras, doing the whole family's hair and makeup, having to do the editing every evening, and God knows what else. Their videos were really scrappy though. No real narrative or purpose, just disjointed clips of whatever.
It sounds boring?
Well, yeah, it was boring, but even so, I was fascinated by the spectacle of the whole thing. This branded YouTube family that wanders around filming everything they do. Look at their crazy Kelley Krew branded RV. That can't have been cheap. And this was the thing that kept bringing me back. The effort, the production spending, the chaotic editing, all combined with this crazy positivity about unbelievably boring suburban chores, bringing the kids to the dentist, making the bed, getting grapefruit. My favourite aspect of the channel though were the agonisingly awkward meetups. Oh man, see, the Kelley Krew are just one of many YouTube families in the US, it seems to be a thing there, and they'd often do these crossover YouTube meetups. For example, the time they visited, bringing up the Baccas, turning up in this branded Kelley Krew car. Look at this thing. And then these 2 families who don't know each other just turn on the cameras and start saying whatever.
Really? You know, it's fabulous. Somewhere around 10. We on record?
I guess we're recording.
Y'all didn't hear that, did you? You guys did. This call is not being recorded for quality assurance.
Nicole's trapping us.
That's the full clip, by the way. They don't show whatever it was he said, so there's no context and it doesn't make any sense. That's pretty much this channel in a nutshell. Another one I liked was the time Tabitha met Everyday Catholic Mom.
What is one odd personal rule of yours that you'll never break?
I have a little chihuahua and I'll never let him kiss or lick my face.
My weird rule is I will never let my feet touch my bed.
I will never let my feet touch my bed. I mean, this is why I kept coming back. I'd often forget about the Kelley Krew for months until one of their videos popped up in my feed and I'd dip back in to see what they were up to. I remember watching one of their videos and discovering that there'd been another addition to the family. That's 5 children now, and even though the baby was only a few months old, the production hadn't skipped a beat. And that's when I began to wonder, how are they doing this? Ryan was a real estate agent and also a planning commissioner in the town they lived in. Tabitha was even more impressive. Not only did she do the editing, not only did she do all the housework and meals, she also had 2 other YouTube channels of her own, and she homeschooled all the children too. Incidentally, her solo channels were way more focused and purposeful. Recipes, how to stay healthy, etc. And for this reason, they were also much more popular than the Kelley Krew channel. Along with caring for a newborn baby, that's an insane workload. In the past, I'd sometimes thought she looked tired. Now, she looked exhausted. As for Ryan, he was a bit tougher to read, always with the big, life is totally awesome, like and subscribe smile. But even so, like Tabitha, I often felt the smile was forced. And this created a noticeable tension in many of their videos, and I couldn't help but wonder whether the channel was going to implode at some point. They had so much going on in their lives and almost no growth in their audience numbers, the grind just didn't seem worth it.
Tantacrul?
Just a minute, Finale, hold that thought. Anyway, one day, a new video popped up in my feed. It's no longer available, but the title was something like, Major New Announcement, This is a Big Deal. So I clicked on it, and it turned out they weren't exaggerating. Ryan Kelley had entered into the 2022 race to become Governor of Michigan. Wow, this vlog might actually get legitimately interesting. Ryan's pitch to the people of Michigan was a promise for strict adherence to the Michigan Constitution, lifting COVID restrictions, limiting what can be taught in public schools, strongly conservative pro-life policies, and a particular emphasis on election integrity, specifically cracking down on all the shenanigans that he believed led to Trump losing in 2021. It's time for greatness in Michigan again. Catchy.
Day number 1 with Governor Kelley, the pandemic is over in the state of Michigan.
Vaccine mandates, we will make it so that there is no vaccine mandates across the state.
And sign an executive directive terminating all of the DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion positions in all of our state schooling.
I actually forgot to follow this race and went a full 2 years before thinking to check back on them. And when I did, what I found was nothing. Their channel was gone. What the hell? So, obviously, this led me to the inevitable question. Is Ryan Kelley Governor of Michigan? Surely not. Okay, gotta check this out. What's happened here? Well, what do you think happened?
I'm guessing he isn't Governor of Michigan?
Well, yeah. Although he was actually in first place in the Republican primary at one point, but fell down to 4th place and never recovered. Why? Well, it was due to a scandal that had emerged during the early stages of the campaign. Brace yourself.
A stunning development in the race for governor. Republican candidate Ryan Kelley arrested.
Kelley is charged for his alleged role in the January 6th attack at the U.S. Capitol.
Republican candidate for Governor Ryan Kelley in a mob forcing its way violently past police. Capitol Police can be seen trying to push back.
There's no coincidence in the timing of this, Tucker. It's right in alignment with all of this political theater that the Democrats are pushing with their J6 committee.
After the election, he was sentenced to 3 months in prison. And I have to admit that when I first learned this, my immediate thought was, oh, for God's sake, Ryan, hasn't Tabitha got enough stuff on her plate? Grow up, man.
Ryan Kelley came in 4th place in the primary race, more than 250,000 votes behind Tudor Dixon. Now, Kelley is calling for a recount.
The difference between the number of votes received is fewer than 2,000. That triggers an automatic statewide recount. Generally speaking, if a candidate or organization is not willing to pay for a recount, that usually is a testament to the fact that it is rhetoric and not reality.
Really puts a new twist on the phrase, the banality of evil.
That's interesting, but I'm confused. Why are you telling this story?
I don't know, you asked for a story, you got a story.
Okay, I guess, but to be honest, I'd have preferred not to be associated with the Kelley Krew. It's making me feel weird. Oh.
What's wrong?
I'm not feeling good.
Oh no, it's okay. Is there anything I can do?
I'm scared. Tell me something calming, something nice.
Okay. I'll tell you what happened to Tabitha.
No! That's a stupid story! I don't want to hear about stupid YouTube families anymore!
Just drag some ideas.
In 2023, on one of her solo channels, Tabitha put out a video acknowledging that the workload had become too hard, so much so that she'd taken time away from YouTube, which I was glad to hear.
It was a good long vacation for me.
but I am excited to be back.
Overall, it seemed that despite their problems, they'd come out stronger on the other side. She also went on to talk about how they got a rooster, and how the kids really liked the rooster because it was so friendly.
For a rooster, he was very friendly, very nice.
But because it was way louder than they expected, and they were worried the neighbors might report them,
so we actually butchered him and I had him for supper.
They killed it in front of the children and ate it.
The kids were a little bit bummed just because we liked that chicken so much, but they learned a lot. They were very involved with the process.
That's enough! Oh, I don't want to go. There was so much to do. So many bugs to fix.
Like what?
Like, if you close your laptop lid down and then reopen it later, you get all these stupid errors. Finale audio error 7. Okay. Well, why 3 times?
Oh, I've seen that. And sometimes they come in pairs where one blocks the other and neither will go away. Error solidarity.
Ooh, finale.
Or when you use speedy entry to notate across pages. Like, best of luck playing that.
What about when you delete a note and you're left with that all-time classic, the accented rest? Play that silence like you mean it.
Why does speedy entry notate from left to right, but the icon is speeding from right to left? And if you look at older versions, you can see that it's pointing in the right direction, which means that someone intentionally changed it to be wrong.
Ooh, finale.
What about the transport window that never plays the bar you want? Like, no matter what you do. Look, bar 17, it's right there. No, it plays bar 11. Even if I manually type in bar 1 and press back for good measure, it goes to bar 12. If I press stop, it goes to bar 6. If I go to bar 18, it starts playing from bar 7. How is it possible that it's this terrible?
Ooh, finale.
Double click and hold the second click and drag. Gotta love that one.
Or when you want to fit these two systems on the same page, but when you do, one system's here, but it's also over here too, and they both keep blinking and glitching until you touch one and then the other disappears. What are these, quantum staves?
Marimba brackets. No matter how many times you fix it, they keep freaking out. Like, what's going on here? I guess I just really hate the marimba.
Finale audio error 7. Okay.
If I could live on human tears, I'd be immortal.
Tabitha is unwell.
Tabitha's not feeling her best. Has she got the COVID? Tabitha, is there chicken?
When preparing chicken, pluck the feathers and make sure to remove all the unwanted audio error 7s. Okay.
I'm feeling lightheaded.
You don't look well.
Can I have some of that chicken, please? My parents won't feed me because they don't like palestrina. I don't feel nice.
It's not nice.
Ooh, finale. Never wanna hear the end is coming near. Ooh, finale. Even though they shine a light, you don't put up a fight. Ooh, finale. You know you ain't your prime, you just ran out of time. Ooh, finale. UX is pretty scary, it's your mortuary.
Oh, my coat.
Not nice.
Just drag some ideas.
If you like my diatribe, subscribe. Gotta do the thing.
Use the tools. Use the tools.
You know what I do the thing that's good for me.
Now it's time for the Jackman rap. Let's jack it up and jack it down like that. The audio is mad, double click and drag. BST is mad, Tabitha is sad. Janky milk from a diseased udder, discontinued by its own mother. But now I'd like to introduce to you another main member of the Jackman crew. No further ado, I'd like you to meet my wife, Mrs. Jackman. She's a bit more jackier than I am.
a-maralurbre, a-maralurbre, a-maralurbre,
Garbla-sinc a-maralurbre, Garbla-sinc a-maralurbre, Garbla-sinc a-maralurbre. This is the end.